On a quiet June morning, Jack Belmont found a crisp envelope taped to his porch railing, marked Urgent, HOA Notice. The cicadas had just begun their lazy summer chorus, humming over the gentle rustle of trees swaying above Mason Oak's narrow sidewalks. Jack stood barefoot in his slippers, staring at the envelope like it might explode. The paper was too white, too sharp against the warm woodgrain of the railing, as if it didn't belong here among the rocking chairs and hydrangeas. He peeled the tape away, opened the flap, and read the notice through twice before setting it down carefully on the small side table beside his glass of sweet tea. Inside, the letter said his American flag, the one he had mounted on a discreet bracket beside his front door since the day he moved in, violated Article 3, Visual Uniformity and Decorative Fixtures. No flags of any kind, it read, without prior written approval. Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. His hand grazed the smooth edge of the porch railing, then drifted up to the tiny brass screws that held the flag mount in place. For a moment, his fingers hovered there, uncertain, before he turned back inside. At breakfast, the smell of toasted bread and apple butter filled the kitchen. He moved with practiced ease, spreading the apple butter evenly, not too thick, just as Ellie used to like it. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily. Before sitting down, Jack turned on the radio. A familiar gravelly voice spoke about honor, sacrifice, and the legacy of those who'd worn the uniform. Jack let the sound fill the room, grounding him like the scent of the toast or the shine of Ellie's teacups in the cabinet. By 8:15, he had crossed the street to Millie's diner, where the screen door creaked like it had every morning since 1978. "Well, sugar," Millie drawled, setting down his usual order before he even asked. "What's got that storm cloud over your head?" Jack handed her the notice. Millie adjusted her glasses, frowning as she read. "Flag violation. Lord, what'll they come after next? Too much pride in your country?" Jack offered a small smile. "Just rules, Millie." Millie snorted. "Rules written by folks who wouldn't know decency if it shook their hand and offered pie." A bell jingled, and a familiar silhouette stepped into the doorway. Andy Mason dropped his bag at the threshold, brushing city dust from his jeans and looking like he hadn't aged a day past his high school homecoming. He spotted Jack, and his eyes lit up. "Uncle Jack." They embraced tightly. Millie nearly dropped her coffee pot. "I'll be darned. Thought you were stuck in Atlanta traffic for eternity," she teased. Andy chuckled. "Couldn't stay away. Time for me to help out, yeah?" They sat together, catching up between sips and smiles. But when Andy saw the letter folded on the table, his brow furrowed. "They want you to take down the flag?" Jack nodded. "Apparently, it doesn't meet community aesthetic standards." Andy blinked. "But it's the same flag that's been here for years." "New rules. New board." Karen Stillwell's name wasn't mentioned aloud, but it hovered in the silence like the aftertaste of bad coffee. Jack tucked the letter back into his jacket and said nothing more. That evening, Jack stood again on the porch, looking at the flag gently rippling in the breeze. He unscrewed it carefully, the bracket groaning slightly in protest, and folded the fabric with precision born of habit. Red over white, then blue field inward. His fingers were steady, but his eyes lingered longer than usual. He placed the triangle-folded flag inside a drawer beside Ellie's Bible, then closed it gently. Behind him, Andy leaned against the doorframe, silent until Jack turned. "What if we found a way to fly it legally, taller than ever?" The next morning, Andy walked out with a notepad and a measuring tape, and an idea that might just rattle the rulebook. He squinted against the rising sun, warm light bouncing off the white siding of Jack's modest home. The cicadas were already murmuring in the trees, and the sprinkler across the street ticked in rhythmic bursts over a perfectly edged lawn. Andy knelt by the porch and jotted notes, his lips moving as he counted paces from the front steps to the old oak tree near the curb. Jack, coffee in hand, watched from the porch rocker. "Flag engineering?" he asked. "Something like that," Andy said, standing and dusting his hands. Georgia Code Section 44-3-232. Freestanding flagpoles under 25 feet and meeting all safety regulations are exempt from HOA restrictions. As long as we're not attaching it to the house, we're in the clear. Jack raised an eyebrow. You sure? Andy held up the printed statute with a grin. Dead sure. Maliciously compliant. Jack let out a dry chuckle. Sounds like a combat tactic in a lawyer's war. Later that morning, they settled into their usual booth at Millie's. The place buzzed more than usual, word had traveled fast. At the counter, neighbors glanced over their mugs, half curious, half wary. Travis, one of the newer residents who wore fitness gear like armor, approached their table, arms folded. Really, Jack? He asked, gesturing toward the paper sketches spread before them. You're digging a hole just to poke a finger in the board's eye? Jack didn't flinch. He tapped the edge of his notebook, the one labeled House Projects and Thoughts, its cover worn soft by time. Not poking, he said calmly. Just planting something worth looking up to. Travis scoffed, mumbled something about stubborn old men, and walked off. Millie slid a plate of peach cobbler in front of Andy. Don't mind him, sugar. That flagpole better outlast my knees. Back at the house, Jack pulled out his old toolbox and opened it like a treasure chest. Inside were tape-wrapped screwdrivers, a compass from his service days, and a half-faded measuring square. Andy crouched beside him, reviewing the plans. I was thinking concrete base, 10-inch diameter, steel core, Andy suggested. Jack tapped the paper near the sketch of the foundation. Reinforced crossbeam here. That's how we used to anchor radio poles in Okinawa. The afternoon air thickened with heat. Jack wiped sweat from his brow as he knelt near the mailbox. A robin flitted nearby, wings fluttering, and landed atop the box. In its beak, a ribbon of straw. It began weaving diligently into the growing nest nestled beneath the curve of metal. Jack watched in silence, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. Feels right, he murmured. Footsteps approached along the sidewalk, steady, familiar. Reverend Ellis, white shirt rolled at the sleeves, held something across his shoulder, a well-worn shovel with a carved wooden handle. Thought you boys might need this, he said. Been sittin' in the church shed longer than most of us have been alive. Jack took it with reverence. Appreciate that, Reverend. You dig a hole right, the Reverend said, it holds more than a pole. It holds conviction. By late afternoon, the first shovelful of soil lifted. The ground was stubborn, clay packed beneath loamy surface, but they dug with purpose. Andy grunted through the third foot, sweat darkening his shirt. Jack took over, his movements slower but precise. They paused only to sip water, their silence filled with rhythm and resolve. Then the sound of tires crunching gravel. A silver SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. The windows were tinted, hiding whoever sat inside until the driver's door swung open. Karen Stillwell stepped out, clipboard in hand, heels clicking against the pavement. She looked at the hole, then at the flagpole lying nearby, then at Jack, who did not stop digging. She flipped a page on her clipboard and narrowed her eyes. 3 days later, with concrete cured and bolts tightened, the flagpole rose, not defiant, but dignified. The morning air still held the hush of dawn when Andy slid the window open and let the scent of dew and honeysuckle drift in. Jack was already outside, wearing his pressed khaki shirt and the faded service cap that rarely left the top shelf of his closet. The pole stood at full height now, 24 feet of brushed steel reaching into the blue, its base firmly anchored just left of the mailbox where the robin's nest remained untouched. The neighborhood still slept, save for a few porch lights flickering off with the sun's arrival. Andy stepped out with his phone cued to play taps, and Jack held the folded flag, blue field and white stars pressed sharp into the creases. Neither man spoke. They moved in quiet ritual, like a memory passed down rather than an act improvised. As the recording began, Jack secured the flag's edge to the clips. The sound drifted into the stillness, slow, solemn notes threading between branches and doorways. When the flag caught wind halfway up the pole, it unfurled in a snap that broke the silence. Red, white, and blue snapped skyward. A screen door creaked. From across the street, Frank Diaz stood on his lawn in his robe, arms crossed. He didn't smile, but he nodded once. Behind another curtain, shadows moved, a neighbor watched without stepping out. Andy hit stop on the recording. The last note lingered in the air longer than the digital file could account for. Karen's heels clicked the sidewalk before either of them turned. She had a planner tucked under one arm, pen already uncapped. No prior approval was submitted, she said, not looking at the flag, only at the pole's base. Didn't need it, Jack replied evenly. State law. Karen scribbled something. There will be an HOA notice. As she walked off, Andy watched her spine, straight, fast, indignant. At the diner, Millie poured 2 coffees before they even sat. She eyed them over the rim of her glasses. Well, she said, I hope y'all like being famous. Andy raised a brow. Check your phone, sugar. The Facebook group, Mason Oaks Matters, already had the post near the top. The photo Andy uploaded just an hour earlier, the flagpole in morning light, captioned, Honor lives here. Within the comments, likes, hearts, and firestorms. A dozen thank you notes from veterans' families. A few snide remarks about compliance. And one long thread debating HOA powers. By mid-afternoon, Jack's inbox lit up with a message from the board. Subject, unauthorized installations warning. Body, this installation was not pre-approved and may constitute a breach of HOA guidelines. A daily fine of $500 will be assessed until the structure is reviewed and removed. Further legal options may be pursued if noncompliance continues. Andy read it aloud, his voice rising only on the last line. Jack said nothing. Instead, he went to the hall cabinet and returned with a small frame. He opened the shed, grabbed his old stool, and walked to the pole's base. He knelt, brushed the concrete clean, and placed the frame at the foot, glass gleaming with morning light. Inside, a printed page, the First Amendment, bolded and centered. That night, Andy rummaged through boxes in the garage. Beneath a stack of old tools and a sealed tin of nails, he found it, a small cigar box labeled Chuck's. Inside, his father's dog tags lay coiled beside a folded photo of 3 men in uniform, dusty from years untouched. He sat on the workbench and traced the engraved letters. The next morning, a boy, maybe 8, with a backpack swinging from his shoulders, paused at the flagpole on his way to the school bus. He stood still for a moment, looked around, then raised his hand to his brow in a clumsy but sincere salute. Millie leaned across the diner counter, speaking low enough to stir curiosity but loud enough to spread news. The board's planning an emergency meeting, and it won't be pretty. The pews of Mason Oaks Chapel creaked gently as neighbors shuffled in, not for prayer, but for war. A box fan hummed futilely near the pulpit, barely denting the thick Georgia air that clung to every surface. The wooden arches of the chapel, usually echoing with soft hymns, now bore witness to an uneasy silence broken only by the occasional cough or rustle of a program. Rows of folding chairs lined the aisle where the choir normally stood, and at the back, a folding table held sweating pitchers of lemonade and a tray of untouched biscuits wrapped in paper napkins printed with sunflowers. Karen Stillwell stood near the altar, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tightly they looked like punctuation. Her presence filled the room with tension. She adjusted the mic, unnecessarily, and cleared her throat. This emergency town hall has been called in response to recent actions that have undermined the visual and procedural stability of Mason Oaks, she began, voice clipped and controlled. We've observed unauthorized modifications, online agitation, and disruptions that threaten the harmony of our community. Jack Belmont sat near the front, arms folded over his chest, Andy beside him, legs stretched and face unreadable. Neither flinched. Across the aisle, Reverend Ellis leaned forward, hands folded atop his Bible. He watched not with suspicion, but with studied patience. From the back, Travis shifted in his chair. His eyes darted between Jack and Karen, like someone trying to track the wind in a storm. He held no paper, no planner, just a frown creasing deeper with every word. Karen rattled off phrases from bylaws, proprietary conformity, unauthorized erections, and neighborhood decorum. Each term landed like gravel tossed into still water. When she paused, a few hands stirred. None raised. Only the sound of a hand fan fluttering and someone clicking a pen. Then, Reverend Ellis stood, smoothing the front of his shirt with fingers that moved slowly, intentionally. "Karen," he said, voice low but firm, "I understand your concern. But I also understand that when a man raises a flag he fought under, and does so within the bounds of law, it is not destabilization. It is declaration. And in this country, that's still protected." A murmur stirred the rows. Someone coughed into their fist, covering applause that never rose but lingered in air like held breath. Karen's gaze hardened. "We are not debating national values. We are maintaining neighborhood order." Mrs. Cranston, seated 2 rows back, leaned forward. Her voice quavered with age but cut with clarity. "I was here when that chapel roof collapsed in '87, and Jack Belmont was the first to patch it. With his own ladder. I don't need a committee to tell me where honor stands." Another rustle. An older man in suspenders nodded. A young mother bounced her toddler and looked unsure where to settle her eyes. Karen drew a breath and laid a paper flat on the table beside her. "This," she said, tapping it, "is a petition to enforce the removal of non-compliant structures, namely, the flagpole." The words dropped like lead. For a second, even the fan seemed to stop humming. Travis opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked toward Reverend Ellis, then at Jack, then back at the petition. His shoulders drooped, not in defeat but in decision. The room splintered. Conversations bubbled up like water hitting hot oil. One man asked about precedent. A woman whispered, "It's a flag, not a casino." Another neighbor pointed toward the chapel garden, where after dusk, someone had quietly placed a miniature flag beside the angel statue, no note, just presence. Then, like a bell calling for calm, the Reverend closed his Bible. He rose once more, taller this time, older somehow. "A town that fears its own flag," he said, "is already divided." His words hung in the rafters longer than the cicada hum outside. Karen didn't reply immediately. Her lips twitched, just slightly, and her pen tapped twice against her clipboard. "We'll take this further," she said, eyes not on Jack, but on Andy. "Legally." The morning paper hit porches with a thud heavier than usual. Mason Oaks, flagpole uproar grows. Jack heard it land before he saw it. The sound pulled him from the breakfast table, where his toast had cooled next to a jar of apple butter. He bent down, retrieved the folded pages, and stared at the front headline. The photo beneath it, grainy and cropped, showed the flagpole in full height against the sunrise, the caption reading, "Symbol or standoff?" Andy scanned the article over his shoulder, brow tightening. "They didn't quote you right," he muttered. "Makes it sound like we're instigating." Jack shrugged, unfolding the paper entirely. "Let folks read. Some will know better." Down at the diner, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual clatter of plates and hum of gossip had given way to hushed tones and sideways glances. Millie poured coffee without her usual banter, her apron a little wrinkled. She leaned in as Jack and Andy slid into their booth. "I got folks asking if we're starting a movement," she said, voice low. "Others asking if they should repaint their porch just in case." Andy sighed, folding the paper. "It's not a movement. It's a memory." Millie nodded, then pulled a folded envelope from behind the register. "Came this morning. No return address." Jack opened it slowly, careful with the edges. Inside was a single sheet, typewritten. A note from a 93-year-old World War II veteran in Savannah. No name, just, "Keep it flying. Some of us still remember what it cost." Jack read it twice before tucking it into his shirt pocket. Later that afternoon, Travis appeared on the front path, shoulders hunched, hands in the pockets of his cargo shorts. He didn't knock, just lingered until Andy noticed him through the screen. "I'm not here to argue," he said, eyes fixed on the porch boards. I found something." From his backpack, he pulled a weathered army jacket, olive green, with a faded name patch, M. Harper. "My dad's," he said quietly. "Never saw him wear it, not once. But I guess I didn't really get it till now. Jack nodded, silent. Travis's voice trembled slightly. Thought maybe I could help. Record the flag. Show it right. Inside, Andy set up the tripod with Travis's phone while Jack fetched the folded flag once again. The afternoon light made everything gold. They kept it simple, no speech, no music. Just the rise of the fabric, the gentle luff in the breeze, and Jack's hand resting briefly on the pole's base, right above the framed First Amendment. They titled it, "This is not defiance, it's memory." Andy uploaded it with a quiet description, and by evening it had over 10,000 views. Comments came in from all over. "My grandfather salutes you. We need more of this. Let the man raise his flag." Karen showed up just before dusk. She didn't bother with the sidewalk this time, heels clicked up the front steps. Her eyes were hidden behind sunglasses, though the sun had already dropped behind the oaks. "Fines are active now," she said, handing over a printed notice. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore. You're setting precedent." Andy opened his mouth, but Jack lifted a hand. "I've set precedent before," he said. "In uniform." Karen said nothing further. Just walked back down without looking at the pole. As she disappeared around the corner, a boy, maybe the same one who'd saluted days earlier, pressed a piece of paper onto his window across the street. A crayon drawing, red stripes, blue square, stars like small fireworks. He smoothed the tape with both hands. Andy stood later in the den, watching Jack pull open an old drawer in the hallway. The lining was velvet, worn from years. From beneath yellowed letters and folded photographs, Jack retrieved something wrapped in tissue, a purple heart. Without a word, Andy walked to the study, found a small frame, and prepared it. He didn't mention it when he set it next to the war photo on the mantel. That night, while Mason Oaks slept under a sky hazed with summer heat, the quiet held something different. A soft creak echoed from the yard. Jack sat upright in bed, straining to hear beyond the crickets. No footsteps followed. No engine. But the sound had been real, metal shifting, faint and deliberate. Outside, the flag still waved in the moonlight. But the base had shifted, ever so slightly. By sunrise, the pole was leaning slightly, like an old soldier wounded but standing tall. Jack Belmont stood at the edge of his porch in the pale light of morning, coffee forgotten in his hand. The pole, once upright with near military precision, now listed a few inches off true. He walked slowly across the dew-laced lawn, heart thrumming louder than the cicadas. At the base, 2 bolts had worked loose, not naturally. Someone had tampered with it. Quietly, deliberately. He knelt, fingers brushing the softened earth, then straightened his back with a calm that surprised even him. No shouting. No pacing. Just resolve. Inside, Andy was already stirring, tapping at his laptop when Jack entered. "We'll fix it," Andy said before Jack could speak. But not quietly. Before noon, the post had gone live. A digital flyer, red, white, and cleanly lettered, "Flag-raising picnic, July 2nd 10 a.m., all neighbors welcome." Beneath it, a photo of Jack beside the pole, with the caption, "This isn't protest. It's Mason Oaks remembering who we are." Millie was the first to show up. She didn't knock, just walked in with a tray of coffee and a paper sack that smelled of warm cinnamon. "I heard," she said, settling the bundle onto the table. "They won't scare us quiet." Jack smiled faintly. "I'm not scared." "That's what scares them," she replied. Later that afternoon, Reverend Ellis pulled up in a weathered church van, doors opening to half a dozen teens in matching t-shirts and worn sneakers. They filed out, one carrying a bucket, another a shovel. The Reverend gave Jack a nod and gestured to the kids. "They're better with dirt than scripture. But their hearts are clean." Travis arrived not long after, carrying a red toolbox and a stepladder. He didn't speak right away, just knelt and began checking the foundation. His hands moved with quiet skill, tightening, packing fresh soil, wedging small stones for stability. Andy printed stacks of flyers at the kitchen table. He taped them to mailboxes, fences, and the glass door of the diner. Mason Oaks honors itself. It felt less like a slogan, more like a promise. On Sunday morning, folding chairs dotted the Belmont lawn. An elderly couple brought a quilt to sit on, a family arrived pushing a stroller. Someone set up a small table with sweet tea and paper cups. Millie unfurled her mother's old quilt, stitched decades ago with faded flags and stars, and draped it across the picnic bench like a banner. The sun was already hot by mid-morning. Jack wore his service cap. At exactly 10, Andy took his place near the pulley and slowly began the raise. The flag rose with quiet grace, rippling as if it remembered what the day meant. The crowd, 24, maybe more, stood. Some shaded their eyes. Others placed hands to hearts. Jack saluted, spine straight. He held it longer than usual. Then something remarkable happened. Another hand lifted in salute. Then another. Travis. Reverend Ellis. Even the boy with the crayon flag in the window. One by one, a dozen neighbors raised their arms in quiet unity. A hush fell, the kind only respect could command. From across the street, Karen watched from behind her bay window. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted a piece of paper, stamped and official, bold red letters across the top, violation, final warning. She gripped it tightly, knuckles whitening, as the flag fluttered in the breeze, surrounded by townsfolk who hadn't planned to stand together, but somehow had. The folding chairs at the Mason Oaks Pavilion were arranged neatly, until the truth rearranged everything. Lanterns swayed gently in the humid dusk, casting soft halos across the neat rows of folding chairs under the pavilion roof. Jack arrived early, as always, but tonight he lingered near the edges, content to let others take the center. The chatter was different now, nervous, alert. Karen took the stage with her usual practiced poise, hair pinned and blazer crisp despite the heat. Her voice carried through the pavilion like a schoolteacher reciting rules, each word clipped with purpose. Unauthorized construction. Disruption. Social division, she listed, eyes darting toward the Belmonts. Andy stood when she finished. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. From a worn manila folder, he removed neatly printed documents and began to speak. These are the HOA budgets from the past 5 years. Cross-checked with public records and vendor invoices. One by one, copies circulated. A hush fell over the crowd as people flipped through the pages. Line items blinked out at them like red flags: maintenance, $18,000, landscaping review, $9,300, and yet the flower beds had gone untrimmed all summer. Travis stood next. His phone trembled slightly as he tapped open a file. These are the board meeting recordings from earlier this year, except, well, these two are missing. The ones where the budgets were passed. He locked eyes with Karen, who had gone very still. From the third row, a gray-haired woman in a teal windbreaker raised her voice. I'm a retired auditor. I reviewed this. These numbers don't add up. Karen's posture broke. Her arms dropped to her sides, shoulders collapsing inward. You're all ungrateful, she snapped, her voice shrill. I kept this town neat. I sacrificed for you. But no one spoke. Even the insects seemed to pause. With a trembling hand, Karen gathered her binder and stormed away, heels echoing against the wooden floorboards. The HOA board huddled, whispered, then one man stood and said clearly, effective immediately, Miss Stillwell is suspended pending internal review. There was no cheer. Only a collective intake of breath, like the town had exhaled after years of holding still. In the silence that followed, the Reverend stood, walking calmly to the front. The fireflies flickered in the background like distant candles lighting a path no one had seen until now. Reverend stands, says, tomorrow is not just Independence Day for this nation, it's for Mason Oaks, too. The morning sky was a sheet of soft cotton blue, and the flag rose into it like a hymn. By the time the sun crested over Mason Oaks, the lawn before Jack's porch was already dotted with folding chairs, coolers, and checkered tablecloths weighed down by platters of smoked ribs, cornbread, and gleaming bowls of peach cobbler. Children in red, white, and blue darted around a makeshift obstacle course fashioned out of old milk crates and streamers. The scent of charcoal and honeysuckle hung in the air, a lazy breeze tugging gently at the strings of paper lanterns. Jack stood off to the side, near the base of the pole, his hands clasped lightly behind his back. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual, and his old service cap sat just slightly askew. People came in waves, each offering a handshake, a nod, or just a warm smile as they passed him. He gave no speeches, no grand gestures, only the quiet presence of a man who had already said everything by standing firm. Andy lingered close, making sure the tables stayed stocked, the speakers worked, the lemonade flowed. He moved with a grace that surprised even himself, not frantic or forced, just settled. When he caught sight of Jack gazing out over the crowd, he smiled softly and returned to tending the grill. At noon, Reverend Ellis approached the small dais someone had cobbled together from church pews and scaffolding. His voice was gentle but unwavering. Today, he began, is not just about fireworks or parades. It's about remembrance. About the small, steady kinds of courage that build a town. That build us. A hush fell over the gathering. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. He gestured toward the flag, now gently rippling against the sky. That pole stood because someone decided memory was worth the fight. Because neighbors chose to see each other not as nuisances, but as stories. And because, when it mattered most, we chose to rise, together. Near the food table, Millie dabbed at her eyes with a gingham napkin, muttering something about onions, though no one was chopping any. Then came the video. Travis stood beside Jack, holding his phone as the clip played over the speakers. It wasn't flashy. Just a slow montage of porch views, faded photos, kids saluting, and veterans nodding solemnly. The last frame lingered on the pole itself, the caption simple, Mason Oaks remembers. There was a long moment of silence, then applause, slow at first, then swelling into something louder, something full. Some clapped. Some cried. A few just stood very still, letting it soak in. Amid the cheer, a city maintenance truck rolled up quietly. Two workers stepped out, one carrying a small metal sign that read, Historical Landmark, Mason Oaks Flagpole. They affixed it to the stone base beneath the flag. Jack stepped forward, fingertips tracing the new placard like it might vanish. Andy joined him. They said it was unanimous, he murmured. Even the mayor called to say thank you. Jack didn't reply. He just nodded, once, slow and full of weight. In a quiet corner, Karen sat inside a parked sedan, windows up, hands gripping the wheel. No one seemed to notice her. Or perhaps they had, and simply chose not to react. A child ran by, sparkler in hand, laughter trailing like a ribbon behind her. Reverend Ellis descended the dais and found a shady spot beneath the magnolia tree. Millie passed him a glass of sweet tea, still cold despite the rising heat. Travis sat near Jack now, holding a miniature flag in one hand, the camera off at last. Jack reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside, a worn brass pin glinted faintly. Without ceremony, he handed it to Travis. You stood tall, son, Jack said simply. Travis blinked fast but didn't speak. He just closed his fingers around the pin and looked toward the flag. The day stretched long and golden. Sparklers flared. Dogs barked. Somewhere in the back, someone tried to start a watermelon eating contest. And through it all, the pole stood, not taller than before, but fuller somehow. The council letter was framed on the porch by late afternoon. Someone snapped a photo for the local newsletter. From violation to valor, the caption would read. Under the awning, Jack, Andy, and Travis sat in wooden chairs, glasses sweating in the heat. The sun dipped low. Jack looks at Andy and simply says, let's get the other pole painted. We'll need 2 next year. On a lawn once marked by silence and warnings, the flag now danced in the breeze, raised not by rebellion, but by remembrance. What began as one man's quiet stand became a chorus of neighbors rediscovering their voice, their pride, and their power. When rules are used for good, communities thrive, When they're misused, they crumble under the weight of their own silence. Perhaps it's never too late to join hands with your neighbors and remind the world what dignity looks like. Like sunlight through an old chapel window, one flag can light a whole town.